Because understanding great literature is better than trying to read and understand yet another business book. On the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast, we commit to reading, dissecting, and analyzing the great books of the Western canon. You know, those books, from Jane Austen to Shakespeare, and everything else in between, that you might have fallen asleep trying to read in high school. We do this for our listeners, the owner, the entrepreneur, the manager, or the civic leader who doesn't have the time to read, dissect, analyze, and leverage insights from literature to execute leadership best practices in the confusing and chaotic postmodern world we all now inhabit. Welcome to the rescuing of Western civilization at the intersection of literature and leadership. Welcome to the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast. Hello, my name is Hasan Sorrells, and this is the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast, episode number 109. With our book today, a Southern Gothic novel and a Bildungsroman. I love saying that word, it's German, that stands alongside Uncle Tom's Cabin as one of the rare books in the United States of America and cultural and literary history that has grown larger in the American social conscience over the long course of time. The author wrote of what she saw and experienced directly during her childhood and during a time when people weren't necessarily bleeding all over themselves in public because there was no internet and there was no social media. Reaction to the novel varied widely upon publication. Despite the numbers of copies sold and its widespread use in education, literary analysis of this book is actually shockingly sparse. In speaking about the novel, the author once said, and I quote, "I never expected any sort of success with this book. I was hoping for a quick and merciful death at the hands of the reviewers, but at the same time, I sort of hoped someone would like it enough to give me encouragement. Public encouragement. I hoped for a little, as I said, but I got rather a whole lot. And in some ways, this was just about as frightening as the quick, merciful death I'd expected." Close quote. This book, which garnered its first-time author an unheard of Pulitzer Prize win, has not endured a quote-unquote quick, merciful death in the public conscience. Instead, just the opposite has happened with this book. Today, we will be focusing on some of the very many ins and outs of what everyone in high school, at least, believes is one of the important novels by a female author of the late 20th century. The 1960s To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. Leaders, know the difference between positions and principles and choose very carefully where you will stand. And of course, today, as usual, we will be joined by our regular co-host, Tom Libby. This is Tom's favorite book, and he was very excited to do this episode once he saw it on the list last year. So how you doing, Tom?
I am doing great. And you're right. It is definitely one of I put it in probably the top 5 of my all-time favorites. Like when you think of books, that you've read throughout your life, number 1 and 2 kind of bounce back and forth between this and Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee and a couple of others. But this is definitely at certain points has been one of my all-time favorite books. And as we get deeper into the book itself, I'm sure why will come out during this episode, or at least I hope the why comes out.
Yeah, so I had read this book, not early in high school, which is most people are usually assigned in like 8th, 9th grade, somewhere in that weird like middle school, early high school kind of period. I got the book when I was probably 16 or 17 was my first interaction with To Kill a Mockingbird. And I vaguely remember reading probably about half of it and then just kind of wandering away slowly from it, not because it was a bad book, but because at that time in my life, I was kind of distracted by a whole bunch of other nonsense. I was into movies and I was into comic books, and it just seemed, it had the cover. By the way, the copy of the book that I have here, I'll show it on the video. Those of you who are listening to the audio can't see it, but this is the original Harper Perennial Modern Classics cover from the 1960s for To Kill a Mockingbird. This is the cover of the book that I had back in the day when I checked it out from the library, because the library, by the way, for those of you who don't know, the library was this giant sampling thing before the internet where you went and got books. Although I hear Gen Z is actually going there because it's quiet and it's in no phone zone, and they can actually like talk to people.
Imagine that.
It's the new bar. Anyway, but this is the version that I have. And the version that I had when I was a kid did not have winner of the Pulitzer Prize on it. I think they put that on like after she died in 2016. And we'll talk about, of course, the literary life of Harper Lee and get into a little bit of her background, which is a little bit, to me, more fascinating than a book. But to close my thought, I had read it when I was, like I said, 16 or 17, and I kind of just wandered away from it, and I never went back and picked it back up again. And then as a result of this podcast, went back and looked at it again. And of course, I've seen the Gregory Peck movie, who hasn't? But I don't think I've revisited that either. I might go back and watch that after we get done with this recording. Maybe I'll watch that this weekend.
I would suggest it, knowing you as a movie buff as you are, because there are some nuances to that movie that you just don't see today.
Right.
Like facial expressions and the way that the cinematography works on the zooms and things like that, because you don't need to do that today with all the technology we have. And I would say, Gregory Peck is Gregory Peck, and people can argue how great he was and one of the better actors of all time, blah blah blah, so on and so forth. But honestly, in this movie, he was, even from my standard, like, he was really good. And then even a real weird thing that I realized, that not a lot of people know, just a very small, kind of footnote thing, is this was Robert Duvall's first movie.
Okay,
so, that's
fact. Interesting. Fun
so
fact.
Robert Duvall plays the role of Boo Radley in the movie. And it was his first movie role. So I thought that was interesting too. Just so for those two things alone, I would suggest you watch the movie, because it was interesting to watch the movie knowing that.
Yeah. Well, and what was the last thing I saw Gregory Peck in? The last movie Roman Holiday, because my daughter, who doesn't like other things, certain foods, she really enjoys Roman Holiday, because she likes the idea of like Vespas and riding around Europe. And of course, Gregory Peck is in that with what's her name? Audrey Hepburn. And then of course I've seen Gregory Peck in Guns of Navarone. And as an actor, he always impressed me as being a guy who he wasn't Cary Grant, where Cary Grant always like sort of smirked at the camera. He's a smirking kind of gentleman. That's why he could do comedy. Gregory Peck took himself, at least as an actor, I always thought he did, and the roles that he played, he always played morally serious roles, like with moral weight. He sort of reminds me a little bit of George Clooney in that way, a little bit, except Clooney came along at a different time and has different parameters because it's just a different era. But I could easily see Clooney doing Gregory Peck roles, because I think he sort of likes that idea of being a serious actor, whereas Cary Grant was always more like Brad Pitt.
Yeah.
Oh, I know I'm good looking, and I'm gonna kind of like smirk around it and whatever. I'm like, stop it. Anyway, I'll watch To Kill a Mockingbird this weekend. I'll check it out. It's on TCM Classics, actually, in the Max app. So streaming.
I saw it on Tubi.
Oh, on Tubi. Okay, all right. I just got turned on to Tubi like about 2 months ago.
Yeah.
So
it's an interesting platform, but we don't have to talk about that.
No, we don't, because that'll lead into a discussion of like Brooklyn Nine-Nine, and no one cares about us.
Exactly.
No one cares about us talking about any of that.
But I think, but back to the movie book comparison, I felt very strongly that this was one of those movies that did the book justice.
Okay.
versus, because I know a lot of times now we're turning books into entire series of shows on whether it's HBO or whatever, HBO Max or Netflix or whatever, because we're trying to shy away from trying to fit a 300-page book into an hour. It's a 90-minute movie,
Yeah.
or they're doing things like Dune where they're separating the movie out into like 2 or 3, 4 parts, but it's still, Dune's 3 hours. So we're trying to fit. I think this was one of the few books to me that took a regular length movie and actually did the book justice.
Well,
All the
and
major components were in it. All the major like dialogue was in it. All the major storylines, all the major moral thoughts that they had in it. Like, you got almost all of that from the movie that you did by reading the book. So I thought it was a really good depiction.
well, Harper Lee was involved in the I believe she was involved in writing the screenplay,
The original screenplay.
the
Yeah.
original screenplay, which, I mean, F. Scott Fitzgerald wrote screenplays, but I think if I remember correctly, and of course our listeners can correct me on this, because I don't have IMDb up right now, but if I remember correctly, he wrote the movie script for his novel Tender Is the Night, and he didn't like Hollywood. He didn't like working with Hollywood. He did it because he had to eat, and he moved on with the rest of his life. But he struggled with that conversion of his book to a script. But the other author that I think of, 20th century author who worked really well in film, was William Faulkner. William Faulkner wrote a lot of scripts, and Faulkner, well, no, Harper Lee is often brought up in the conversation along with William Faulkner as one of those, as I said in the opening, Southern Gothic writers that sort of really captured the South during a particular historical and cultural moment. And the fact that that script had all that in there was probably, I mean, obviously due to her influence. She knew what to cut, of her own work. All right, well, let's get into the book. As usual with a book of this weight and this size that is, of course, still in copyright, you can't get an open source version of To Kill a Mockingbird like anywhere. We will be summarizing To Kill a Mockingbird. So we'll be looking at really the first part. This is divided up into 2 parts, and there's a lot of stuff that happens in this book. We cannot possibly cover the whole book. So I would recommend you going out and reading it. But To Kill a Mockingbird opens with the characters of Jem Finch, Atticus Finch, Dill, Calpurnia, Boo Radley, who we already mentioned, played by Robert Duvall in the film, and Scout, Jean Louise Finch. She's the narrator of the story. Now, Scout stands in for Harper Lee in this novel, and the entire thing is written. And this is going to be one of the things that's going to capture you. And as an adult, it really sort of kind of blew me away that she was able to hold the narrative all the way through. But it's written through her eyes, right? Through what she sees, and not the eyes of an adult, although it is an adult looking back, but it's an adult looking back and then trying to fit themselves into a 6 to 8-year-old brain and mindset, and not do it in a precocious or precious kind of way, which is one of the reasons why this book works. In chapters 1 through 4 of To Kill a Mockingbird, we learn that all of the children live in a segregated environment in Macomb, Alabama, but they don't perceive the segregation deeply, nor are they at an age where it will impact the impressions of their lives. We often talk in our own era, and Tom and I will talk a little bit about this today as well, because this is one of the main themes of the book. We often talk in our era about, can children see race, and how soon should we begin bias training with children, and how soon should we begin, knocking down social and cultural biases around race or gender or any other form of identity. And the fact of the matter is, do children come in? No, not do children. The fact of the matter is, children come into the world with certain impressions for sure, but they also come in blank. It's a weird mix, and you don't know where the blank parts are, and you don't know where the impression parts are. And the first 4 chapters of To Kill a Mockingbird really set that tone. We're looking at a child's life through a child's eyes, and there is segregation, but that word isn't even used by Scout anywhere in the book. No. It's too complicated a word for a 6 to 8-year-old. The father, Atticus Finch, played by Gregory Peck in the movie, is a local attorney. And The second main theme of the book that we'll talk about today is this idea of a paternal presence that sets the moral undertone of not only a family, but also of the book. Again, this is something that's really interesting and why I don't think To Kill a Mockingbird could be written today. We live in a world where we are currently in the backwash of the Homer Simpson father figure kind of idea, where the father's kind of dumb and kind of not great, and the mom has to come along. I even see this on social media. And the mom has to come along and fix things that the father does. And there's a tension there, right? Because the reality is we do live in a world of competent fathers. I mean, we're recording this the day after D-Day in 2024, and Father's Day is coming up, which is, according to one comedian I follow, interestingly enough on Instagram, the worst holiday ever. he has a compelling argument there. Even my children struggle with what to get me for Father's Day, and I tell them, as I'm sure every father who is listening, even Tom's a father, every father listening tells them, you don't have to really get me anything because I can already get everything myself if I already want to get it. I don't need anything. But Atticus presents that moral weight, particularly for Scout and for her brother Jem and their friend Dill. He also presents the moral weight for the town as a local attorney, and we get the beginnings of that. And a lot of the ways in which Scout views him are the way a child views a grown-up, not in the way grown-ups view other grown-ups. So there are many things that are a mystery in the first 4 chapters to Scout. We also begin to explore in chapters 1 through 4 the character of the town of Maycomb through its citizens and their relation to history as perceived by a child. Again, I want to reemphasize, this is not written from an adult's perspective. There's not an adult sense of maturity and wisdom and even cynicism on all of this. There is a sense of innocence in To Kill a Mockingbird, and that's probably why it's assigned to high school students, because, you know, if you're a teenager, you can really read this book and really get your arms around it because you think adults are stupid and they don't know anything. And from your perspective, they are stupid and they don't know anything. But you're also still a child, right? You still have some, depending upon your circumstances, sense of wonder about what is laying in front of you in the world. When we think about To Kill a Mockingbird, we have to think about Harper Lee. She was born on April 28th, 1926, and she died February 19th of 2016, not but a few years ago. She was an American novelist, and that's pretty much the only job she had that I can find anyway. She was the youngest of 4 children. Her parents were Frances Cunningham and Amasa Coleman Lee. Lee's mother was a homemaker, but her father was a former newspaper editor, a businessman, and a lawyer who also served in the Alabama state legislature from 1926 to 1938. And I do believe that she had a strong relationship with her father because, well, Atticus Finch is basically Harper Lee's dad. Through her father, she was related to Confederate General Robert E. Lee and a member of the prominent Lee family. Before her father, Amasa Coleman Lee, became a title lawyer, he once defended 2 black men accused of murdering a white storekeeper. Both clients, a father and a son, were hanged, which is how things happened back in the day. And I'll tell a story here on the podcast a little bit later about my own personal interaction with such social problems. While enrolled at Monroe County High School, Lee developed an interest in English literature, in part through her teacher, Gladys Watson, who became also her mentor. In the summer of 1948, Lee attended a summer school program. And by the way, she was already writing by this point, small articles, magazine publications, things like that, right? And her father thought that the summer school program, European Civilization in the 20th Century at Oxford University in England, would help her be more interested in legal studies at Tuscaloosa, because he really wanted her to go off and become a lawyer. That turned out to be a hope in vain. And that was not the path that she was going to go down. So we got Harper Lee, and we've got To Kill a Mockingbird, and we've got some background here. So Tom, what's your reaction to the your first encounter with To Kill a Mockingbird? Talk a little bit about that, and the impression that this book has made on you.
Well, I think that by itself is probably a loaded question, because I think we could stop right there and we could just talk for the next hour and a half about just this question. Because so I found one of the reasons I found this book so fascinating was I grew up in a very mixed race environment. I grew up very poor. I mean, I felt like I was reading about myself in some portions of this book, right? Like not I wasn't in Alabama, I get that, like, but and it certainly wasn't racially segregated the way that they were talking about, but we felt economically segregated, like whether you were black, white, or Hispanic or other, we were all in that group treated just differently than some of our counterparts that weren't growing up in that in that same neighborhood. Mm-hmm. So but one of the things that really stood out to me was, I should probably preface this. So this might make a little bit of an impact to the audience. So I grew up not knowing my biological father until I was about 21, 22 years old. Okay. So when I started reading, like I almost kind of wanted a father like Atticus, right? Like Atticus Finch, and I felt like he would be the kind of guy that I could bring home my friends that were not racially the same as me, and he wouldn't have treated them differently based strictly on the way they looked, because that's the feeling you got from him in the book. Mm-hmm. That his moral compass was in such a way that he was judging people by their merit, not other factors, including how poor they were. And if you read the book, Scout at one point even asks him, "Daddy, are we poor?" And he says, "Yes." And she goes, "Are we as poor as the other family?" I can't remember the name of the family at this point, mm-hmm. but are we as poor as the other fit? And he goes, "Well, they're farmers and we're not. The farmers were hit harder. So they're a little bit more poor than we are, but we're never going to make them feel that way." Mm-hmm. Essentially, I'm paraphrasing, but so he even looked at it like the poor looking down at the poor, and he didn't care what their race or color was at that point. He just felt like, we're not going to make them feel bad because they're more poor than we are. We're just going to make them feel, we're going to make them feel like they're our peers, so to speak. And again, I'm paraphrasing. But when I'm reading stuff like that, and when I was looking at this as a kid, I'm thinking to myself, wow, like if I had a dad like that, like all my friends could come over and he wouldn't think anything of it. Like he would invite them to dinner, or because he does that in the book with one of the kids that Scout gets into a conflict with, they end up inviting him over for dinner. And I was like, I think that's cool now. So, and bouncing back between the book and the movie, because I think, again, like I said earlier, I think this particular movie does a really nice job interpreting the book, right? Like in Gregory Peck in particular. And when you watch Gregory Peck interact with the Black community in the movie, you just get this sense that the segregation wasn't in his mind. The segregation was physical. I mean, obviously you can see it, and it was written about, and how this was a white neighborhood and that was a Black neighborhood. But the way that the book is written, and as you're reading it, and the way that Gregory Peck depicts it in the movie, you can just get this sense from him that the segregation isn't in his mind. The segregation is only there because it has to be there, so to speak, right? Yeah. It's required to be there, so I'll deal with it because it's there. But he gets it just the way he, again, I'm referring to Gregory Peck in the movie, just the way he walks to the front porch and shakes the man's hand. And then you're like, because in 1930s Alabama, you're just not expecting that, right? Like you're not expecting that kind of respect and mutual and there's another part to it where Atticus is leaving the courthouse, and one of the members of the Black community kind of nudges Scout, and he's like, "Hey, stand up, your father's this is important to your father, stand up." Like, and it was the Black community that was trying to teach her that lesson, not the segregated white community. Like, so I just felt like this book did a really nice job of like, and don't even get me started about what was her name? The house.
Calpurnia.
Calpurnica.
Yep.
right? Because there was a quick, and I think it might get lost to a lot of people about this part, but Calpurnia pulls Scout aside to discipline her. Now, this is a black woman disciplining a white girl in her own home. And Gregory Peck thought nothing of it, which is, again, one of the things that I found blew my mind, right? I was like, that wasn't supposed to happen during those times. Like, and by the way, in the movie kind of shows like she actually gives her a little tap on the butt. And I was like, wow, this is powerful. Like that to me was like, yes, because people like one of my favorite lines, and I'm going to get into a little bit of trouble here, so I apologize, but
Yeah.
I'm just going to say it because I say it right. One of my favorite lines is when people say to other people, like, and you've heard the phrase 1,000 times, say something, I know you have. They say, well, I don't see color.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm like, well, you kind of freaking have to, man. Like, we're different colors. Like, what do you mean you don't see color? Now, that being said, so when my kids asked me growing up, so my kids asked me what that meant, right? Like, what do they mean when they say that? Do they not recognize that that person's black or that person's brown because they're Hispanic, or that, that when in the middle of summer, when we're tan, we have a red tint to our skin. We always have a red tint because of our culture. And I was like, okay, so when people say that phrase and they mean it legitimately, they're naive. They have no idea what they're talking about. Because if they truly say they don't see color, then they're not they're not experiencing the wonder of cultural differences that we all have, right?
Mm-hmm.
What I think they mean by that is I don't judge people based on strictly their color. I don't view people or treat them based on their color, because I either dislike or like people based on the merits of the person, not what their skin tone is, right? So I like just as many black people as I don't like. It has nothing to do with seeing color or not seeing color. I like them as a person. I don't like them as a person. And I don't care what color they are. I'm going to base my opinion of you on your merits. And the reason I say all of this is because I think some of that comes out in this book with Gregory Peck in the movie too. And the way that he sees people, the way he stands up for Tom Robinson, the way in the scene or the chapter when the mob goes to the jail, right? Because the Tom Robinson finally came back to the local jail, because at some point the sheriff was holding him outside of the communal jail because he knew what would happen. Like the sheriff knew what would happen. And so as soon as he comes back, sure enough, mob shows up, and who's standing in front of the mob, not letting them in? Gregory Peck. And I was like, damn it, like I really want to know this guy, like, because this can't possibly be a real guy in 1930s Alabama. And
apparently he was though.
Yeah,
apparently he was though. So I think that's why this book, and again, I place it next to Uncle Tom's Cabin by Harriet Beecher Stowe.
So yeah,
it's one of those books that when I finally banged through it and read the whole thing, right, it's one of those books where I realized about 3/4 of the way through, I thought, this book came along. And by the way, this is not Harper Lee's fault. It has nothing to do with her. She wrote, she published, she did what she was supposed to do. That's her job. One of the things we've been talking about, or we did talk about last month with some of our female authors like Catherine Ann Porter and Zora Neale Hurston, was how timing is hugely important.
Yeah.
Like for Hurston, unfortunately for her, she came along and then she declined, but the people had to pick her up later on, right? They had to find her on their own, right? Catherine Ann Porter, nominated for Pulitzer Prizes, but nobody reads her stuff anymore. She's like Pearl Buck. Nobody reads her stuff anymore. And by the way, we should be reading it. She wrote one of the better explanations at an emotional level of what happens in a flu epidemic, because she lived through the Spanish flu epidemic of 1918, and she went bald and all her hair turned white. I think that made an impression on her. I just think it did. Timing is everything. Stowe had timing with Uncle Tom's Cabin. Matter of fact, Abraham Lincoln is quoted as when he met her at the White House, I believe, or in Washington, D.C., because the White House didn't exist, basically, at that point in time. They were building it, I think, if I remember correctly. But he said to her, "Oh, you're the little woman who wrote this great big book that started this war," you know.
Yeah.
And Harper Lee is, just to sort of bring that forward another 100 years. Harper Lee is the woman that wrote this book that landed in an environment that was ripe for desegregation. Sure. And so I think that's why it's had its cultural impact. We'll talk a little bit more about that today. Had its cultural impact that it has had. And talking about your own personal engagement with it, you said you read it in high school and you emotionally connected with it because of your personal experiences. I read it in high school and I got distracted by it because other emotional things, and I'll talk a little bit about this today, but other emotional things were happening with me around that area. And so there was a lot of confusion there, not about segregation, not about racism, not about any of that, but confusion about where do I personally stand as a man? Like, what is that going to be? And I didn't, at that time in my life, I did not have a whole lot of good role models, right? I had a whole lot of bad ones, but I did not have a whole lot of good role models. And so,
I didn't have any.
Yeah, you didn't have any. You didn't have any, So I think that's the other place where this book lands, to your point. And then talking about Calpurnia, you mentioned, and she's the African-American housekeeper that lives in the house with the Finches. The paragraph here it's in literally the very first chapter. It's exactly what you're talking about. And I quote, Calpurnia was something else again. Now, this is again through Scout's eyes, right? Through the 6-year-old's eyes. Calpurnia was something else again. She was all angles and bones. She was nearsighted. She squinted. Her hand was wide as a bed slat and twice as hard. She was always ordering me out of the kitchen, asking me why I couldn't behave as well as Jem when she knew he was older, and calling me home when I wasn't ready to come. Our battles were epic and one-sided. Calpurnia always won, mainly because Atticus always took her side. She had been with us ever since Jem was born, and I had felt her tyrannical presence as long as I could remember.
I loved it. I love that. Come on.
Close quote.
It's again, when you're thinking about the time and the era that this was supposed to take place.
Yeah.
I bet you half of America would not have believed that actually happened if you announced it at the time, right?
So, well, hold on. Well, okay, let me do this. I'll tackle this one early. So, one of the things that you do get from people who live in the South, and I lived in the South for a good chunk of my high school years. People call Texas the South who are from the Northeast. Y'all don't know what you're talking about. This is the West. Y'all have no clue what you're talking about. Not you, but just in general, the global you. Y'all don't know what you're talking about. This is the West out here. It's not Yellowstone, Kevin Costner West, but trust me, it's the West. People walk around here unironically with cowboy hats on and giant belt buckles. Like, give me a break. Come on. And they're wrestling cows. So I don't even want to hear it. When I think of the South, I think of the deep South geographically. I think of Louisiana, Alabama, and Mississippi. To me, that's and Georgia. That's the deep South. And even Georgia is shifting around.
Well, to me, Georgia's the South, but the other three are the deep South, right? Like that's I think that's where the dividing line is for me.
Yeah.
Like you got Georgia, the Carolinas, Georgia, Tennessee, that's all the South. Then you get into the deep South, which is like Alabama, Louisiana.
Well, and there's an argument to be made Arkansas. That maybe the South begins on the east side of Dallas and goes to like the west side of Atlanta. There's an argument to be made there, maybe geographically, sure. Right? And maybe goes as far north as maybe Memphis and as far south as Jacksonville. Okay. When you talk to actual people who actually live here and actually live in those areas that I've named, that geographic boundary that I've named, one of the things that drives them absolutely nuts, and actually the book references it too. Some of the women in the sewing circle talk about it in part 2 of the book. One of the things that drives them nuts is the perceived, on their part, and they're not wrong in this, by the way, the perceived hypocrisy on the part of, as they call them, Yankees, who will talk about equality all day, but won't let Black people marry their daughters.
Mm.
At least we down here, actually, the Sewing Circle actually says this. One of the ladies does. At least we down here are keeping them in their place, but we're allowing them to rise in their own place. So which one is, and of course, it's framed as which one is better. And we talk about Martin Luther King Jr. on this podcast every February with Black History Month. And one of the great, I don't know if I would call it a success, one of the great knock-on effects from the civil rights struggle was in the 1960s and 70s was the forcing of Americans on either side of what was formerly known as the Mason-Dixon line. No one even uses that term anymore. To actually confront their individual hypocrisy. So people in the north of the Mason-Dixon line, had to confront, okay, we say Black folks are equal to white folks, but guess who's coming to dinner is a popular film, right? Like that didn't, if I remember correctly, that took place in like California. That didn't take place in Alabama. And then, the South, separate but equal, but we're not going to give money to make it actually equal. We're going to let it just sort of do whatever it's going to do and let 1,000 poppies bloom. Okay. I think those dynamics are well represented in the book. And I think that is a huge literary achievement for a first-time author. And it represents not only the level of her talent, but I think it also represents her level of chutzpah, maybe, because she didn't know what she didn't know, right? Yeah. She didn't know that you were not supposed to do that.
I was just gonna say, she just kind of threw it out there.
Just kind of threw it out there.
See what happens. I was gonna see to her own words, like she was hoping for like a quick death, meaning
right.
She wanted, if she was not going to be a good author, she wanted to know right away, so she'd go do something else.
Right.
That was the whole point of that statement.
Yeah, her one of her mentors was what's his name? The guy who wrote, I'm not going to remember it. It doesn't matter. But he was a famous 20th century author. Y'all can look it up on Wikipedia. But he was one of her mentors. And Truman Capote, there it is. I knew if I talked long enough, it would eventually come into my brain. So Truman Capote, who wrote In Cold Blood, okay, a book which we will not be covering on this podcast. But Truman Capote basically advised her to write from her direct experience as much as is humanly possible. And so I think that what you're seeing in Atticus is what not only her father was, and I think Southerners had a problem with this book because we were going to talk about it winding up on the banned book list too.
Yeah.
I think Southerners had a problem not because they didn't have Atticus types in their midst. They did. I think they looked at the Atticus types as their dirty laundry.
Oh, so I was thinking,
and they didn't want their dirty laundry exposed to the rest of the world.
I was thinking that the Atticus Finches of the world were not as impactful in real life as they were portrayed.
I think that's the dirty laundry part. I think that's the dirty laundry part, right? Gotcha. And then Hollywood comes along, and here's the other part that we forget. The dynamic between regions in this country, because this country's, we're a third of a continent, for God's sakes. The dynamic between the regions in this country is still, we saw this with COVID, is still sharp. It's still sharp. Like, I thought it had died down, right? But nope. It's still an undercurrent. It's still there. And so from a Southerner's perspective, number one, I got these Northern Yankees coming down here telling me I got to desegregate. And then I got these California hippies coming here and making some movie. Like, get out of town, go back to where you belong and stop coming down here and telling me how to live. Now, from the Californians and the Hollywood perspective, we're going to go down there and we're going to make a movie and it's going to be socially relevant and we're going to expose. And I'm not saying this was the thought process of folks making, To Kill a Mockingbird. I'm just saying that this is the undercurrent sort of exaggeration or metaphor or caricature, right? That we put on
It's like a
individual regions.
righteousness, right? It's like righteousness of Hollywood. Like they feel like
Right.
they're gonna do it right. They're gonna make sure it's right. It's authentic. It's that like, and they never. I shouldn't say they never do, but they rarely get the gist of it. You know,
Right.
like it. I mean,
And then you got some
listen,
kid watching the movie in New York or in Boston going, wow, is that what the South is really like? Holy crap.
or if you're from Boston and you watch a movie like The Departed and you go, who has an accent like that? Like I don't know anybody that like so the rest of the country thinks we speak like that. Like, what is wrong with this? Because they tend to overemphasize that quirkiness of whatever region they're talking about, right? Like
Right.
so again, the Boston accent. And by the way, I know we have one. I get that, but and some of my best friends have Boston accents. So
We were just talking about Dennis Leary before we recorded this podcast. Before we hit record.
but and I forgive them for that. And no, but the way when Hollywood gets their things on their grips on it, they're like, we're gonna make it authentic. So we're gonna make this Boston accent really pop, really show. Right. And I feel like they do that everywhere else, like around, and not just the country, by the way. I feel like they do it around the world when they're making a movie about anywhere. It's like they grab onto that thing that the region is known for, and they over accentuate it to make sure that people understand that that's what they're doing, and they're trying to make it authentic. And then they overdo it, and it becomes a nuisance to people. Like every time a TV show, a movie, or documentary is made about the Northeast or whatever, I'm just waiting. That my cringe hackles are already up because I'm waiting to hear the Boston accent that drives me bananas. Because like half the people around me do not speak like that. Like we don't. It doesn't. So, and I'm assuming that's part of their problem too. Like when they're gonna say, we're gonna make this Southern, but we're gonna make it authentic, and we're gonna bring this to the, and they're like, and I'm sure Southern people cringe at it, right? To your point, that the rest of the country or the rest of the people watching it think that this is authentic, and this is how everybody down there acts, and everybody down there is, and everybody. It drives me crazy sometimes, but
and the nuance of the book, and then we'll go back to resummarizing here in a moment. But the nuance of this book is that, to your point, she wrote an individual book about individual people living individual lives inside of a group sociocultural milieu that, and by the way, there are characters in this book like Ms. Maud, right? Or Aunt Alexandra. It's not just Atticus Finch, Dill, and Miss Rachel. Love that kid, Dill. There were characters in this book, even the villain, Bob Ewell, who they knew the thing they were in, but they didn't have the power or the will to change it. And
I felt like that was stronger from the sheriff's perspective than Bob Ewell's.
Right. Yeah. Oh, yeah. When he's talking to Atticus at the end when what happens with the kids and all that. And he's like, listen, I loved it how he was like, I'm 43 years old. I don't know a whole lot about a lot of things, but I know a lot about this.
Yeah.
You let me make this decision.
Right. And he took the burden off of Atticus's conscience.
Right. But like, that's an example. Well, we talk about this sometimes on the podcast. That's an example of an adult in the room. When I say on this show, where are the adults in the room? That's what I'm talking about. That interaction right there. Where are the people who will go, listen, I'm name your age here. That's older than whoever's in the room. I've got a few more years of life on you. I know a few more things. And you know a lot about a lot of fancy things. And boy, is that cool. But I know about the permanent things that you don't know about yet. So I'm going to make this decision, and you're going to kick and scream, and you're going to cry and wail. Hell, you're going to blow me up on that thing called TikTok that I'm not even on. I don't care. This is the decision that needs to be made right now. And then they just go off and make it. And they go off and live with the consequences of it.
Yeah, it was also a good example of like, doing what's right is not always by the book, so to speak.
Right, exactly.
Right? Sometimes you have to sometimes have to take a a slight left turn to make sure that there's a difference between being right and being just.
Right.
And in this particular case, I felt like the right decision was making sure that the just decision was to the surface.
Well, and Harper Lee wasn't. So again, she's writing this through the perspective of a 6 to 8 year old. So
Right.
a 6 to 8 year old is not going to ask the question. And I think this is why there's been very little literary analysis of this book, because a sophisticated critic in our year of our Lord 2024 is going to ask this question: why couldn't the sheriff have done the same thing for Tom Robinson? And the answer to that question is this: 6 to 8 year olds don't deconstruct the world to figure out who's got power and who doesn't. 6 to 8 year olds don't perceive the socio-cultural political milieu in the same way that a 35-year-old critic with an axe to grind and a blog in New York or wherever does. They just don't. They haven't lived that experience. We like to talk about a lot about lived experience. Well, the lived experience of a 68-year-old ain't that. The lived experience of a 6 to 8 year old is, well, this thing happened over here with the adults, and then I went off. And by the way, this is exactly how the book is written. And then I went off and did a bunch of stuff with my buddies, and I got into a bunch of shenanigans. I loved it how she talked about Halloween. I love that line. and the ham, right? Like she took up whole pages about this. I'm like, what modern author would have the guts? It was amazing. And oh, and by the way, the reason why there was a ham, let me go to this for just a moment. And this is the back chapter of the book. Yeah, the reason why there was a ham. So it was in October. It's towards the back end of the book. And they're talking about Halloween and talking about the costume and Mrs. Tootie and Fruity Barber and sort of why Halloween happened in the way that it happened. And I quote, the second change in Maycomb since last year was not one of national significance. Until then, Halloween in Maycomb was a completely unorganized affair. Each child did what he wanted to do, with assistance from other children if there was anything to be moved, such as placing a light buggy on top of the livery stable. But parents thought things went too far last year when the peace of Miss Tootie and Miss Fruity was shattered. That's an 8-year-old. That's writing specifically from an 8-year-old's perspective, or I'm sorry, a 6-year-old's perspective. Back to the book for just a second, quoting, Mrs. Tootie and Fruity Barber were maiden ladies, sisters who lived together in the only Maycomb residence boasting a cellar. The Barber ladies were rumored to be Republicans. No judgment there. Just this is the thing I hear as a 6-year-old. I don't even know what that means. Having migrated from Clanton, Alabama in 1911, their ways were strange to us, and why they wanted a cellar, nobody knew. But they wanted one, and they dug one, and they spent the rest of their lives chasing generations of children out of it. And I quote further, Mrs. Tootie and Fruity, their names were Sarah and Frances, aside from their Yankee ways, were both deaf. Miss Tootie denied it and lived in a world of silence, but Miss Fruity, not about to miss anything, employed an ear trumpet so enormous that Jem declared it was a loudspeaker from one of those dog Victrolas. And I had to pause for a minute and think about the logo, by the way, when I was like, that's brilliant. Logo. The RCA logo. That's brilliant. Back to the book for just a moment. With these facts in mind and Halloween at hand, some wicked children had waited until the Mrs. Barber were thoroughly asleep, slipped into their living room, nobody but the Radleys locked up at night, stealthily made away with every stick of furniture therein and hid it in the cellar. I deny having taken part in such a thing. I read that twice just to get it, just to make sure I got the joke.
Yeah.
That's the mind of a 6 to 8 year old. And that there are whole passages like this in this book. And that's why it defies literary analysis, I think.
And one of the most profound parts of the book was when Scout at the end of the book, when Scout is trying to ease the mind of Atticus as to why the sheriff is right, and coming from the mind of a 6-year-old, it was powerful in its simplicity. And it was simple because it was coming from the mind of a 6 or an 8-year-old. But to your point, but that's where all the power came from. And you're like, oh damn, like
Mhm.
that was written very, very, very well. And how she pulled back a lesson she learned from him earlier in the book. She basically used his own words, not
Mhm.
against him, but she used his own words to teach him his own lesson.
Right.
I just think again, it was great. It was really good. I love this book.
Let's get back to the summary. So we're going to go through, we're still in the early part of the book. We're bouncing around a little bit, but in chapters 4 through 7, school shows up for the kids, and school is precisely what you would think that it would be for an 8-year-old and I think Jem was probably 11 at the time. And Scout was like 6. So Jem and Scout worked their way through school. Though Scout, who can read and write at an unexpected level in the first grade, much to the chagrin of her teacher, does not value school highly. As a matter of fact, she almost equates it with being in a prison with a bunch of weirdo inmates that she has to deal with constantly. And by the way, one of the things that's also interesting about this book in the early chapters is we do establish that Scout is clearly a tomboy.
Oh yes.
She is clearly a little girl, and she knows she's a little girl. She's not confused that she's a little girl. There's no gender dysphoria going on about her being a little girl. She knows she's a little girl, and she can fight as good as her brother, and she will waylay you in a heartbeat if she thinks that you're getting out of line. And, if she thinks that her brother's getting out of line, she's going to try to waylay him too. And the level of, and it reminded me of being a kid. I will be honest, it did. It reminded me of being a kid in the 90s. I do believe the last time children actually took care of things in between themselves, where it didn't escalate to like a weird level of psychotic violence, either online or in person. It was just, I've got these 2 hands. You want to come on, get some or what? Like, we're gonna fix this now. And the siblings, Jem and Scout, were able to do that. And Harper Lee really described that childlike environment that childlike environment very, very well. Both siblings also engage in the early chapters in all kinds of varieties of shenanigans, all the way from trying to prank Boo Radley, the reclusive neighbor and town legend, and these shenanigans culminate in Jem losing his pants trying to escape over a fence out of a yard full of collard greens. Harper Lee does a really good job in these early chapters of bringing around the neighborhood's dark side and seeing again how that's perceived through the eyes of a child. As rumors begin to swirl, and again, the children are not paying attention to this at the level of that an adult would, not even the level that a teenager would. They're pre-adolescents. They're kids. And they start hearing about how Atticus is defending, and then, by the way, they don't even say Tom Robinson. Atticus is defending this. Well, I'm going to use the word here because it is in the book. This nigger. By the way, that's why this book is on the banned book list, because the word is used quite prominently. As a matter of fact, if I be so bold, Harper Lee, who, by the way, never took any heat as far as I'm aware for the usage of this word in the way that Ernest Hemingway did in The Sun Also Rises, and he only used it like there's a whole passage in there where Mike is talking in the book about a fighter, but because Hemingway's writing about adults, Hemingway gets run. Harper Lee's writing about children, so she's okay. Interesting.
Wasn't there a point though where Atticus even asks her not to use that word?
Yes, he does. Yes,
yeah.
And he's like, okay, can we pass on that? And
okay.
And it's just such a part of her existence, but he doesn't tell her why she shouldn't use it.
True, but I think that might be one of the smaller reasons that Harper Lee never got vilified for it, because there was a point in which somebody looked at her and said, "Can we please not? Can we please not use that word?" Like,
right.
I think there was a little bit of a like a gotcha moment for people reading it. You know what I mean? Like, so like people reading it, and especially I think today in our oversensitivity version of the world, people reading it today, I don't think they pick up that same nuance.
No.
Right?
Oh God, no.
I think they just see the word visually and they have a visceral reaction to it, that word shouldn't be in books. We shouldn't be reading it. And not to mention the fact that, forget about, if, God forbid, you're in a classroom and you have to read it out loud, right? So the teacher now has to make sure that she's selecting students to read that are going to actually read the word. And now he or she are hesitant to where if you
it's nonsense. We're in a different kind of place. It's nonsense.
Well, I'm not sure if it's nonsense or not, because there's still some uncomfortability in it. But my point to it is that the nuance is gone. Like, that's more important to me. Like, you want to skip over the word, fine. I get that. You don't want to let the student read the word. I get that, fine. But if you're losing the nuance to that, you're missing the bigger picture.
If we're not going, okay, nuance. I agree with you. I agree with you on the nuance piece. And I want to double down. If I can't read to kill, no, not even if a 13-year-old kid in Evanston, Illinois, a 13-year-old black kid in Evanston, Illinois, can't read To Kill a Mockingbird, then they also can't read Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee. Sorry, no, they just can't. Sorry, they can't. They can't read Empire of a Summer Moon. They can't read The Sun Also Rises. They can't read Huckleberry Finn. Oh, by the way, they can't.
But Huckleberry Finn's on that list, by the way.
Oh, I know.
Want to get like?
I know. They can't read The Rape of Nanking by Iris Chan.
Yeah.
Because you know what? The responsibility that falls on the people to teach the nuance is now being abdicated in favor of everybody being comfortable.
Yes, right.
And you don't grow and change in order to, let me be blunt, fight the things you think are wrong without knowing what exactly the hell it is you're fighting and all the nuances of it. Like, I'm one of those weird people that thinks that, and I'll go for it, I'm one of those weird people that thinks selections from the Bible should be read as literature in school. That will never happen. We're now what, 70 years almost past you can't pray in school? We're 70 years past that. I mean, once that door opened, forget it. You're done. You can't bring in religious books. And by the way, Bible, let's read from the Quran. Let's read from the Talmud. Let's read from the Bhagavad Gita. Let's do the whole freaking thing. Because guess what? When you're 13, you need not just a little bit of that. You need a range of that.
Yeah. Because
even more so than college and a humanities degree where you get to go specialize, let's be blunt, in high school, where 84% of the people in this country, when they graduate from high school, 84%, it's been this way since the GI Bill in the 1950s, 84% of people who graduate from secondary education do not go to college. Been that way since the 1950s. That number has never moved. It goes up 1 or 2 percentage points when it's economic downturn. It kind of goes down when things are good. 16% is the average since the 1950s.
So 16% of the graduating population
goes to college.
Goes to college.
We haven't moved the needle on that number. Do you know why? Because people, when they get through high school, you know what they say? And they say, you said it. I said it. Get me the F out of here. What did I learn?
Yeah.
I wasted my damn time.
Right. I looked at it as, I don't want another 4-year sentence. Literally words that came out of my mouth. Because I felt like high school was like a sentence. I was sentenced to be there and I had to finish it. And that was it. Like, it was a prison sentence for me.
It was a prison sentence. By the way, that's
like,
how she's writing it in this book. That's how Scout looks at it. She's like, I'm doing time. I already know how to read. Atticus taught me how to read. Well, your dad better not be teaching you how to read. And she's like, what? I don't even understand the words that are coming out of your mouth.
Yeah. And the other thing to circle this back around to the word that started this whole thing.
Uh-huh.
Can I just remind people that words only have the power that we give them.
Yep.
So if you are that teacher in Illinois and you want to read this book,
Mhm.
that word is only going to have the amount of power that you allow it to have. Like, I mean, I know it's a society that like we're frowning on using that word in general, and I get that. Like, I certainly get that. Like, I'm not sitting here thinking that we should go around using that word for everybody. I mean, that's just asinine.
No.
But when you're talking about classic literature in times, and the times were different, if we can't, you listen, you and I have talked about this so many times now that I think maybe the listeners are going to start getting bored with it. But if you're not learning from that past and you're not truthful to that past, to that past, then you are damned and bound to repeat it. So
Mhm.
if we start scratching these words, and again, there are other words that not
Mhm.
just that one, but there are a plethora of these books and words that are in these books that people don't want to talk about anymore because they're not politically correct and whatever. But if they're taken in the framework of those, like we're doomed to. Okay, so it's not going to be that word, but that some other word is going to be depicted as just as hurtful, and we're going to use that instead because we're not learning from the past; we're just repeating it. And again, you and I have mentioned this several times on this podcast, and I don't want our listeners to not listen to us anymore, but it is true. It is true. Words have the power that you give them. Take the
The
power away from it. Take the power away from the word.
I highlighted in here. I'm looking for my highlight. As you're talking, I'm looking for my highlight. I think it was when Heck was talking with Atticus, and he says, and I actually paraphrased it to my wife the other day about something else. Um, but people in general find what they're looking for. When people go looking for something, they find it. So if you're looking for bias in literature, congratulations,
You'll find it.
you'll find it. If
Yeah.
you're looking to be butthurt, and yes, I'm using that term, on this podcast about a word, about the language, guess what? You're gonna find that hurt for your butt. You are. You're going to find it. If you are looking for revelatory, or even maybe not even revelatory, if you're looking for, like Tom opened up with, if you're looking for meaning, and and a role model and hope, guess what? You're going to find it in literature. You're going to find it in the great literature of the 20th century and of the 19th century and of the 18th century. You're going to find it in great Western literature, Hell's Bells. You're going to find it in great Eastern literature. You're going to find it. That's why this is called the leadership lessons from the great books. And guess what? I get to decide, because it's my podcast, what's great. I get to decide that. And yes, we have talked about it repeatedly, but guess what? There's always new people coming in who haven't heard it before, and they're not going to go back through all 100 and some odd episodes to find it out. So someone's going to wind it up, then it's fine. I get incredibly frustrated when I see books on a banned list because books can jumpstart social reform, which is what this book did.
Sure.
Just like I already mentioned, Uncle Tom's Cabin, and the time in which To Kill a Mockingbird came along. We were kind of on the cusp, because this book was published in 1960, I believe.
Yeah. So it was
Check on that.
shortly after Brown versus Board of Education,
Board of
Topeka,
Education.
Kansas.
Correct.
It was shortly before all the MLK, Martin Luther King's movements.
Yep.
It was like that, right? It was right in the middle. So I'm not suggesting that this was the catalyst, but
Yep.
I do think people reading this felt a heck of a lot more comfortable moving forward. Like, because
in culture, books are part of culture.
Maybe a heck of a lot more is probably not the right phrase, but it gave people a sense of what the past could have looked like. Again, like with Atticus, and the way that he interacted with people, and the way that he treated people, and the way that his moral compass. If the past could look like that, then why the hell can't the future look like that?
Right, exactly.
Right?
Well, and culture moves society. We talked about this with Catherine Ann Porter with her short story Pale Horse, Pale Rider. The solo episode that I did, I would recommend going back and listening to folks who recommend them to go back and listen to that, because I mentioned, particularly in light of COVID and sort of the moment that we're in now, at least in the United States, where we have on the one side writers in august magazines like the Atlantic and on august television stations like CNN proclaiming that, well, mistakes were made during COVID. Of course, when we say mistakes were made, think about the language of that. There's no accountability in that sentence. Well, mistakes were made. Everybody should just get over it. My bad. See you next time. And then on the other side of that, you have the Patrick Henry resistance types, and I'll go ahead and sign up to be with those folks who look around and go, excuse me, what? Now, I'm not as far in it as some of those types are, where they're calling for a reckoning and heads on pikes. I'm not calling for Dr. Anthony Fauci to like be publicly, castrated or anything like that. And I'd never do that. Maybe he should probably give back some of the money he got from like Pfizer. That might be helpful. That might lead people to have him, believe he's trustworthy. Maybe sell some of that Pfizer stock that he's got. But hey, I don't get between a man and his money. Okay. My point is, if we want there to be a cultural reckoning, the thing that moves culture is, well, literature and movies. It isn't people on social media. They think they do, but they don't. They actually follow culture. Culture is moved by the artifacts that we create inside of it. Movies, books, stories. These are the things that move culture. And then guess what happens when culture moves? Laws are passed after culture changes because, number one, politicians are always late to the game, and number two, government's always a late bloomer. Like, they don't even know what the hell's going on until after everything's already gone, after everything's already happened that has moved culture. This is why when you see things in the culture that are moving a culture towards a particular way, if you object to that, go fight it in the culture. That's where you've got to go fight it. That's why we have culture wars. That's what that term means. Okay. And Harper Lee and Harriet Beecher Stowe and Catherine Ann Porter and Zora Neale Hurston, they all wrote books that contributed to the foundation of cultural change in the 20th century without one law being passed. And by the way, they were all female. Like, I want to bring up that point too. This isn't some Smokey and the Bandit racist white guy writing some book. I didn't know what Harper Lee looked like. And then her Wikipedia article, like, they had one picture of her from like back in like, I don't know, maybe the 40s or 50s when she was a young woman. And then they had another one where she got some presidential medal of freedom and before she passed away from like Barack Obama or whatever. And, she's a nice little old lady. She looks like a little Christian grandma who'd be like praying somewhere. She doesn't look like anybody threatening. And and by the way, when you go look at Harriet Beecher Stowe, she wasn't threatening either.
Same thing. I was saying same thing.
Out of all the four names that I mentioned, Catherine Ann Porter kind of looked like a little bit like a model, but even her, like, Spanish flu messed her up, right? Zora Neale Hurston, the thing that she was not classically beautiful, but she was a woman who, when you look at her picture and when you look at how she's photographed, she's always looking directly at the camera. She's coming for you. This is how culture shifts. That's what I'm saying.
Hurston, though, like, I found it interesting that she wasn't classically beautiful, but I was drawn to her because I felt like she was a bit more regal, right? Like,
yes.
She had like a regal quality to her,
yes,
which made her a bit more attractive than the average.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
But to your point, not necessarily classically beautiful. I agree with that. She's but she was definitely far from ugly. I found her to be, like I said, the word regal comes to mind. She had a poise about her, to your point, because all I'm seeing is images from pictures. But so it's like, but she had this poise about her that came across from the camera. Like, it was, anyway. I thought she owned it.
She owned that sucker.
Yeah, she was impressive in a different fashion, like in a different way than some of the. But anyway.
So anyway, I'm saying all that to say this: if we want people to change the culture, we have to allow them to use whatever words they need to use in order to change the culture. And we used to kind of understand that. And now we're in this weird, and of course it's because we're at the end of the fourth turning. We're at the end of our latest seculum cycle. I understand why we're here. It's not weird to me. And by the way, we are coming up on the beginning of our next Seculum cycle. I already mentioned that we're recording this podcast the day after D-Day, June 6th, 1944. That's 80 years ago as of yesterday. 80 years is that's a cyclical cycle in history. It's an 80-year cycle. In the West, we go through 80-year cycles. That means we're done. It means like this is the last year of the cycle. And by the way, the last 20 years of an 80-year cycle are always chaotic, which, as I said repeatedly on this podcast, we've had nothing but chaos since the year 2001. We're at the end of chaos, kids. The cultural tastemakers that are going to set the next positive cycle for us in this country had really better understand and be competent about what culture really is and where culture really lies, particularly with our ability to self-publish, our ability to do the kinds of things that you and I are doing right now. These are huge tools that we've never had before. And so are we going to get really angry about language? Like, really? Are we really going to do that in order? So because if we are, then we can't move the culture. That's my whole point. We can't move the culture. You know,
Dave again, Chappelle I go back to words only have power that you give them.
Dave Chappelle infamously says the Second Amendment exists. I love this in case that First Amendment don't work out.
Okay.
and this is a man who he's got a whole bit about living in Ohio and going to Walmart and buying a gun. Like, hey, I gotta go to Walmart and buy a gun. And the white guy at Walmart sold him a gun, sold him a shotgun, I think it was, you know? And it goes buckshot, 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 buckshot. He did the whole bit about this. Oh no, it was buckshot, buckshot round. That's what it was. You know, you want to pepper him up a little bit first. And he goes, yeah. You got anything on there that says, I don't want a white guy running through my backyard? And the white guy at Walmart goes, that thing right there. That'll do it. Welcome to America. This is it. This is where we live. This is the culture moves things here. All right. Let's round the corner on this. What is leadership? Let's look at this about leadership because we should probably talk about that. What insights about leadership and competency can leaders gain from To Kill a Mockingbird? Because we talked about Atticus, we talked about Harper Lee, we talked about sort of Scout a little bit, how she's pugilistic. I mean, it is written as no, it's not written as a kid's book. It's not. That's the deceptive part. It comes off as a kid's book, but it's not. Hello. So I'm going to do some shilling here, and hopefully this will be a pause in our riveting conversation for you. I have an offer for you. My most recent book is 12 Rules for Leaders, the Foundation of Intentional Leadership. It's available in paperback, hardcover, or as an ebook on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Kobo, and any other place you order books. Now, in this book, I address the 12 leadership areas that I have found leaders need to be the most intentional in to be the type of leader followers actually want to follow. From establishing a foundation of leading teams through managing conflict effectively, all the way through leading teams through change, knowing what to do and why to do it can help readers, like the ones listening to this show, become better leaders. Look, reading this book and living it is like getting coaching from me directly without having to pay my full coaching rate. Head on over to leadershiptoolbox.us. That's leadershiptoolbox.us, and scroll down the homepage and click on the Buy Now button to purchase in hardcover, paperback, and Kindle format on Amazon 12 Rules for Leaders, the foundation for intentional leadership. And that's it for me. Now back to the show.
So I think there's actually a lot to unpack there from a leadership perspective, but I think two things come to mind very, very quickly. Number one of the more powerful lessons of the book talks about seeing situations through somebody else's eyes, right? Yeah. There's a lot of talk about how when she comes out, when Scout she walks Boo Radley home or whatever, she's standing on his porch standing on Boo Radley's porch, looking at the rest of the community, she finally gets a sense of what it must feel like to him, right? So from a leadership perspective, being able to address a problem or a situation with the other person's thoughts and mindset in mind when you do so, trying to look at the problem from their perspective could potentially be very, very powerful for you, right? Number one. The second one that comes across, we already talked about it a little bit, was at the very end when Scout basically sets Atticus's mind at ease using his own language and his own lesson. That I always talk. Let me back. I'll tell you this from a sales perspective, strictly from a sales perspective, because I find that sales leaders sometimes forget that you can learn yourself as a sales leader. You can learn something about sales from somebody who's never been in the industry before. They've never been a salesperson before. They're brand new to it. So in this case, they're Scout. Because they have an idea or a thought does not mean you should just ignore them because they have no experience. Listening to them and trying to learn something from somebody else's perspective, or getting somebody who's taking your lessons from fresh eyes and regurgitating them back to you, you may hear something different in your own words, right? Like, so, or you may have a lesson to learn from that brand new person that you weren't thinking you were learning. It's all this reciprocal and circular thing that you think of. But I think for me, from a leadership perspective, and of course, I mean, all of us should be taking Atticus's lead when it comes to moral compass, moral code, doing the job that you're asked to do, whether you like it or not, being, I go back to also when, and again, I know we've got a lot of spoilers here, people. So if you haven't read the book yet and you're thinking, I apologize, but when Tom Robinson dies, the way that Atticus responds to that, to me, was really, he was a community leader at that point. He wasn't a white man. He wasn't dealing with the black community. When he goes back to that family to tell them that he is now dead, again, that's a leadership role to me, right? Like, he looked at that and said, because even I forget who he was talking to at the time. Maybe it was the sheriff, that he was like, oh, now I got to go tell the family. And he was like, I'll do it. Let me tell them. He took that ownership of that because he knew it was going to happen. Like this, and you could tell, not so much in the writing of the book, but the way that Gregory Peck depicts it at the courtroom at the end of the court trial, you could just tell why he wasn't surprised when he got the knock on his door that Tom Robinson was dead. Like, he knew it. He just knew it. And that he took that burden on himself as the community leader to make sure he was the one to go back and take ownership of that to his family. So again, it's like, I think there's a lot to unpack. I think if you look at this from, because again, and there's a couple of interactions with the kids and a couple of the other members of the community that kind of, like, it's almost like one of those, like you're his kids. You didn't know your dad was this cool. Like, you didn't know your dad was like, everybody in the town looks up to him. You didn't know that, because they're so close to it that they don't get it, right? They're so close to him that that's just their dad, and he's their dad, and whatever. And they don't, and it takes a little bit of the book to understand that Atticus is not simply a run-of-the-mill guy. He's not simply just another lawyer. He's not simply, there's a reason that the judge specifically comes to him and says, listen, I was thinking about asking you to take this case. How would you feel about that? So instead of just throwing it down his throat, going, oh, by the way, you're the court-appointed attorney, you have to do this, he came to him because he knew he was going to do the right thing. Like, he knew, he presented it to him as an option, but it really wasn't. But he presented it to him that way because he knew Atticus would do it. And he knew that he would do a good job with it. He knew that Tom Robinson was only going to have a shot in the dark if Atticus was the guy, because of his stature, because of his leadership, because of his position in the town, all that other stuff. And all that negativity that Atticus got from the town was superficial. It was superficial because ultimately people respected him. Ultimately, people knew that he was going to do the right thing no matter what they said. Ultimately, there's just a lot of that happened. So I think there's a lot, and I don't know how you felt about it, or if you had additional commentary, but I felt there was a lot of really good leadership lessons in this book.
Oh yeah, we're gonna use this opportunity to take a turn and talk a little bit about those leadership principles a little bit more in depth, particularly around the trial. I want to talk a little bit about Judge Taylor as well, and the men in the town. So we've got Judge Taylor, we've got Sheriff Tate, obviously we got Boo Radley, and then I want to talk about Bob Ewell because I think there's a lesson there as well that is the Minority Report lesson.
Yeah.
So we go to the lessons that make us feel good or make us feel morally righteous, but you can learn leadership even from a negative. There's things to be learned from Kim Jong-un or from Fidel Castro. There's things to be learned. Usually what not to do, but also sometimes what to do. So yeah, let's talk a little bit about that. By the way, the line that I was going to quote earlier from the book is actually from Judge Taylor when he's correcting Mr. Ewell during his testimony during the trial. And the judge says, and I quote, "People generally see what they look for and hear what they listen for, and they have the right to subject their children to it. But I can assure you of one thing. You will receive what you see and hear in silence," he's addressing the court, "or you will leave this courtroom, but you won't leave it until the whole boiling of you come before me on contempt charges." And then to the point about Atticus, and this is right after Atticus finds out about Tom Robinson's death. Miss Maudie says to Aunt Alexandra, and so Aunt Alexandra is Atticus's sister, and their relationship is interesting. The way that again it's perceived through Scout's eyes. It is a at least from her perspective, it is a tension-driven relationship, and I can remember thinking that way about the relationship between relatives in my family, female relatives and female and male relatives in my family, because I didn't understand all the dynamics that had occurred on the back end that got them to where they were. Just like I'm sure my kids look at my relationships with my siblings in a certain particular kind of way, because I can't really explain it to them. It's just sort of like, this is how we were raised. And we all have those kinds of dynamics. And so when a child observes this, it's very interesting. And in the book, after Tom Robinson gets shot, and then Atticus goes out to go and deal with the challenge at the prison where he had wound up at, Miss Maudie says, "Have you ever thought of it this way, Alexandra? Whether Maycomb knows it or not, we're paying the highest tribute we can pay a man. We trust him to do right. It's that simple." That's it. That's leadership. We trust him to do right. Speaking of the book, back in the earlier chapters, so Jem and Atticus have a conflict. And it's interesting because Jem is not set up as a male counterpart to Atticus. He's set up as his own character. Very often in coming of age stories, which I guess this would kind of qualify as that, as a Bildungsroman, it would typically, when a story is told through the eyes of a child, the sibling is set up as the adult stand-in. And that's not quite how it works in To Kill a Mockingbird. Jem is allowed to be his own character. He's allowed to develop and grow. But he's also, you can tell, in direct tension with his father. And by the way, one of my, I shouldn't say passions, it might be obsessions. And again, this is because of my previous life experiences, which I'll talk a little bit about here as we get around to the trial. One of my obsessions is with fathers and sons, the relationship between fathers and sons. I don't think that merely gets talked about nearly enough in our culture. Because men don't really know. No, that's not it. We're not enculturated in the last parts of the 20th century and the early parts of the 21st century to actually talk about the dynamics of being a son to a father, nor are we incentivized as men to talk about, at least extensively, to talk about what it actually means to raise a son. Women tell us very often what we should be doing and how we should be behaving, but there's very little talk, even in the mountains and mountains of videos and words that are on social media and on the internet. There's very little practical talking about the nature of fathers and sons, the relationship between fathers and sons. And this is somewhat explored in the early chapters of To Kill a Mockingbird, by the way, which sets up what happens later on in the back end of the book when when Jem does the only thing that Jem can do, when Bob Ewell decides that he's going to follow through on his threats. As I said before, breaking into Boo Radley's backyard doesn't go so well, and Jem loses his pants because he is still a kid and he is still engaged in shenanigans. And there's a fire with questionable beginnings. It's never fully explained that burns down Ms. Maudie's house. And it's kind of a narrative thread that kind of hangs in the first part of the book. But Harper Lee does a really clever job of never really referring back to it again, kind of like Anton Chekhov's gun. She just leaves the gun on the table. But also, she uses it to set up Miss Maudie and uses that narrative or that thing happening to her in the narrative as a way to set her up as a strong character, sort of a female version of Atticus Finch. But again, removed from Scout, right? Because she's over there and Scout is over here. So let's talk about that trial. In the South, in the 1930s, which is when this book is supposed to be set, Jim Crow was alive and well. By the way, that term I think is only used once, maybe, in To Kill a Mockingbird. And it might just be me placing that term on the book. I don't actually think she actually wrote those words in the book.
I don't think I remember seeing those those actual words, but yeah.
Right. But everybody knew what Jim Crow was. And for those of you who don't know what Jim Crow was a series of laws that socially separated Black people from white people in the Deep South, and also, quite frankly, in the North. Now, in the North, Jim Crow was informal. It wasn't written down. It was just something that everybody, quote unquote, knew. When the writer Ralph Ellison, it was Ralph Ellison, or it might have been James Baldwin. I can't remember. No, it was Richard Wright. It was one of those three. When Richard Wright, yes, it was Richard Wright. That's right. Yes, because I remember when I was reading about his biography for the podcast episode we did on Native Son, when he was trying to find a hotel in New York City as a socialist, as part of the Communist Party. The Communist Party hotels in New York City were segregated, which is insane to me, because the entire ideology of communism is about workers of the world united. There are no separations between all of us. We're all united against the man. And what could be more of and more exemplary of being the man than, I don't know, discriminatory practices in your hotel? Like, that's the man if I ever heard of it. Well, in the Jim Crow South, Tom Robinson runs across a set of people who are living in Macomb, or just on the other side of where and the word is used in the book, the Negro settlements are, where the Ewells live. Now, the Ewells live in, from Scout's perspective, they basically live in trash, right? They live in the garbage dump, and they mine the garbage dump, and they are poor, they are white, and they mine the garbage dump. And so you put those three words together, and while that term of poor white trash is never actually used, that is what is meant by Scout's description. And from this description, you do get the idea that the only thing that the Ewells have is the fact that they don't share the same skin color with the folks who are living in, well, the Black part of town. Now, in the book, that's an interesting description, because when Scout talks about it, she talks about how basically the Ewells live in trash. And then in the Negro settlements, she talks about how they go down there with Christmas once a year to help out the Ewells. You could smell the good smells of food coming out of their little tiny shacks, and everything was neat and as neat as a pin. That's how she describes it. And then the Ewells are living in this literal shotgun shack with 7 kids, and squalor, right? So, a moral, and again, Scout's 7 years old. She's not drawing a moral conclusion from this. She's just saying, this is what I saw. And this is this creates a dynamic where Tom Robinson, a Negro farm worker, walks past the Ewells every day and gets caught up with Mayella Ewell, Bob Ewell's daughter. And in the process of trying to do her some favors, which he probably shouldn't have done, I would have advised him to stay away from her, not because she was poor, not because she was white, but because, well, she was of a different class, in all the ways that class matters. It doesn't have anything to do with money. That doesn't have anything
hold on. There's another piece to this. Tom Robinson was married. This was another, I don't care what color she is, but there's another woman asking you to help out. And no, you just don't do that.
Why then there's that.
Why would you put yourself in that position in the first place?
Which I mean, so that was brought out at the trial.
Yeah.
And Scout, again, this is a 7-year-old, right? So like it's through just sort of skipped over. And I went back and I looked at that and I thought, what'd that guy's wife have to say?
Yeah, right.
Oh, you're never going to find out. You're never going to know.
Because she whooped his ass on the way to getting arrested just for being in the vicinity. Never mind whether he was guilty or innocent. She didn't even care. All right. she didn't care if he was guilty or innocent. The fact that he was helping her, forget it. She kicked his ass.
I'm not helping anybody. I don't help anybody. I tell my wife, I don't even know other women's names. I don't know their faces. I don't know who they are. I have no idea. I don't know. Do you want me to? She goes, no. Exactly. I don't know. Exactly. I don't know who they are. I have no idea. I'm married. I walk over here, which is what Tom Robinson should have done.
Should have done. Right. The only women that I know are people that are in my family. I know her. I'm related to them. That's it. That's all that matters.
Small anecdote. Went to process some chickens. We talked about this off the air, but I went to process some chickens a couple weekends ago, and another couple that we know is there. And I said a variation of literally that. I don't know any other women. I don't talk to them. And the woman standing there, she goes, well, I feel attacked. And I go, listen, you're not a woman. You're his wife. like that's like, don't pretend like you don't understand what's going on. Stop it. Come on. Oh my God.
So, yeah, but I found, so I got to tell you a small.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, we're jumping into it.
Small tidbit of information too. This book almost changed my mind to go to college and to go potentially to go to law school and to go to like, I when I read this, I was like, I want to be a lawyer. Like Atticus had me so wrapped up in, and again, if you read the transcript or if you read the portion of the book that is the trial, and I was like, I was like, well, there's no way that this guy is innocent. He is clearly innocent. Look at the great job this guy did. I want to be a lawyer like that. And then to find out that there was no way on this God's green earth that a 12-person jury of all white men are going to let this poor guy walk away, knowing damn well he was innocent. No, there's no way, shape, or form that anyone on that jury could have possibly even thought that he even had a shot in hell of doing it. But yet, there's no way, to your point, with Jim Crow and all that other stuff happening in the 1930s in Alabama, the second he was arrested and put on trial, they knew. And I that's kind of what I go back to with like Atticus knowing, he knew from the start how it was going to end. He already knew that. There was no question in his mind, but he still went through with the best defense possible for his client, so to speak, right? So I read that and I was like, oh, I want to be a lawyer. And then I met lawyers and I was like, never mind, I'm not doing that.
Never mind, I don't you don't want to be a lawyer. We've got enough of those.
There's not a single lawyer I met in real life that reminded me of Atticus Finch, just letting you know.
Yeah. There's another lawyer that we know together, and he's not Atticus Finch at all. No, not even close. Well, one of the challenges I had with the trial, reading this as a person who walks around in the skin of, an African American in America, and who has made, without getting deeply into my personal life here, but who has made certain choices about who I love and who I marry and who I make children with and who I make a life with and all this kind of stuff. there are pieces of this where, to my point about Tom Robinson, that you also reinforced, you could see the train wreck coming. And the reason you could see the train wreck coming is because when you're in that kind of social environment, I'm going to frame it this way. When you're in that kind of social environment, what power do you really have? And by the way, not power to take someone's life, which is what Bob Ewell thought he had. Not power to make a social change, which is what Atticus Finch was trying to do, right? Not even power to influence a family, which is what Aunt Alexandra was trying to do, right? If you're Bob Ewell, what power do you have? You have none. You live in a garbage dump. You are in a segregated society that tells you that these people over here with this darker skin, because of the fact that they have this darker skin, are less than you, and yet with your two eyes, you can see them living better than you. There's something here that, as we say these days, the maths don't math, right? It doesn't add up. Then when you go to the welfare office, and by the way, this is during the Depression, so you not only live in a garbage dump, you live in a garbage dump during the Depression, which is even worse, okay? And so you go to the aid office, and you don't speak well, you don't act well, you don't dress well, you maybe take a shower, not even a shower, a bath once a year. All your kids don't have a mom, you don't know where she is. You're basically hitting all the rungs on the way down the ladder of how to not be socially appropriate, regardless, by the way, of skin color, but you're hitting all those rungs. And by the way, Scout brings this up, and the people whose color you share don't want to have anything to do with you either.
Yeah, they don't like you.
They don't like you. Jim Crow fundamentally existed, and I'm going to say something extremely controversial here, but Jim Crow fundamentally existed to protect poor white women from poor black men. That was what Jim Crow fundamentally existed to do, because it wasn't actually about the race. It wasn't actually about the racial designations and the racial distinctions and the racial separations. Everybody said it was, but it wasn't really about that. It was about making sure that people of a certain class stayed where they were, regardless of their skin color. Bob Ewell may have thought that Jim Crow worked out for him when Tom Robinson died, but it turns out that actually it didn't work out for him, because guess what? He held a grudge. And that is one of the fascinating things about this book that I think begs analysis, particularly from a leadership perspective. He had no power. How was he going to go out and grab that power? Well, he was going to go grab that power by harassing the white man who embarrassed him and made him look bad, made him lose face. He got what he wanted. He got the structure of the system to work for him in the way that it had worked for him based on the laws that were set up by the system. He got the outcome. He should have been happy. And yet he was not. Explain Bob Ewell to us, because that's one of the more fascinating characters to me in this book. It's like the Amy Mann song from Magnolia, the Magnolia soundtrack back in the day. You got what you wanted, but now you can hardly stand it. And that's Bob. He got what he wanted.
But the problem, did he though? Did he really though? Because by the verdict, maybe. But what he wanted ultimately was for everybody to be on his side and blaming Tom Robinson. He wanted everybody to believe him. And the fact that Atticus didn't that's what held the grudge. It had nothing to do with the verdict. It had to do with the fact that it was almost like a
But at a material level, if we, and by the way, this book was written at the tail end of modernism, right? So in modernist books, which are typically books that are published between the end of World War I and the beginning of the beginning of the middle of the 1960s, everything from Ford, Maddox Ford, and Ernest Hemingway, all the way to Joan Didion. That's modernism, right? In modernist novels, the villain gets what they want, but they don't know how to deconstruct it. In postmodern novels, which is everything written since the 1960s, Don DeLillo, Charles Portis, not only does the villain not get what they want, sometimes the villain gets justice, sometimes the villain doesn't. Other times the villain gets punished, sometimes the villain doesn't. Sometimes it's an anti-hero. We have no idea what the hell's going on. This is where you get Patrick Bateman from Bret Easton Ellis, but you also get oh gosh, Lucky Ned Pepper in True Grit. Like, postmodern novels are all over the map because we've deconstructed everything. But modernist novels, in modernist writing, there's still that Christian strain of moralism that the villain gets what they deserve.
Well, that's a different statement. He definitely got what he deserved in the end of the book.
Sure, at the end.
But that's a different comment than a few seconds ago where you're asking, like, he got what he wanted.
Oh yeah.
That's my point. I don't think he got what he wanted. Tom Robinson being convicted was not the ultimate goal for him because he knew that was going to happen. He again, everybody in the town knew that was going to happen. Like, there was even a phrase in there somewhere that before the trial started, I can't remember of course it's been a while since I've read it, and I know I've read it, but there's a phrase in there or a sentence or two in there that tells you that you know already that he's going to be convicted. There's no doubt in your mind he's going to be convicted before the trial even starts, before you even start reading it, right? So, but that's not ultimately what Bob Ewell wants. What ultimately Bob Ewell wants is validation and vindication from the rest of from everybody. So as people start understanding that they know he's lying, that that's where the grudge lies. The grudge lies with somebody. It's not Tom Robinson. He doesn't have the grudge against Tom Robinson. He has the grudge against the person who was able to essentially show the town who he really was. So what he ultimately wanted was for the entire town to be on his side. He wanted the town to view him like they view Atticus because he was right and just, but he wasn't. And it came out in the trial. And that's really where his grudge comes from. And the only way he could do it is because he knew he couldn't confront Atticus face to face. There's no way.
Well, and he had multiple opportunities. He was offered the opportunities to do so, and he declined.
Because we get the vibe that Atticus would have whooped his ass, right? Like, we get the vibe that Atticus was not somebody to mess with. Now, They don't explicitly. That's the other thing Harper Lee does really, really well. She says stuff without saying it. Like, that's the best part of it. Like, to your point with the Jim Crow laws, with the social reform piece with Atticus, like, there's a lot of things she says that without saying it, poor white trash. She doesn't say those. She doesn't use those words, but you know damn well what she means. So she did the same thing with Atticus in the way that he has respect in the town. He just you get the feeling that he was the guy that nobody wanted to mess with in any way, shape, or form. So Ewell went to the direction that he felt he could hurt him, which was going after his children.
Okay, so there is and we've talked about it briefly on this podcast before, there is a hierarchy among men. Like, men know what the hierarchy is. Women don't, but men know. We all know. We talked about this before. You know, who's the alpha, who's the beta, who's the sigma, who's whatever in the room. Okay. And there's some of us who don't care about that. You don't care about that. You're like, whatever the hell, I'll go in whatever room I want. I don't care. That's what makes you good at sales, because you have to be that guy. I'm that guy because I'm just pugnacious, and I don't, my own ego is fine. Whatever. I got a healthy ego.
I don't need a thump on my chest to know I'm a man. I'm good.
I don't. Yeah. Please. But if you're gonna come over here, like, like I'm not gonna, like we're gonna do some business, right? Okay. The hierarchy of Maycomb, to your point, is set up where Bob is at the bottom of the hierarchy of these characters. Atticus is considered to be at the top because he's in the legislature. And then you've got the sheriff, Sheriff Heck. And then you've got the judge, Judge Taylor. Now, the judge in the trial runs his courtroom like his own fiefdom, because it is, right? That's where, like, he could do what he wants. He could set his own rules. If he wanted to move all the black people out the balcony and make them sit, what are you going to do? Like, bam, gonna happen, done. Y'all want to be in contempt or what? Or do you want to sit here and be quiet? Like, he makes the law there, right? And by the way, we see this, interestingly enough, in our current political contra Trump, around, well, a former candidate who shall not be named, who's a current candidate for president, and going through the trial process, we are all being reminded of how much power a judge, even a district court judge, has in their own territory and in their domain, and not even a former president of the United States gets to overstep that.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting dynamic. It doesn't work like that in other countries. That is incredibly unusual. In most other countries, the judiciary is impotent, to say the least, or at least a rubber stamping of whatever the dominant structure says is the way that we're going to go. But not in this country, not the way we've got things set up. Okay. Judge Taylor wasn't going to let Bob Ewell get out of control. And by the way, to back up your point, Bob Ewell tried to get Judge Taylor, or at least that's intimated in the book.
Yeah.
So it wasn't just that his ire was aimed at Atticus. His ire was aimed, and I guess this backs up your point further, his ire was aimed at the entire male hierarchical structure of Maycomb. He wasn't going to hurt no woman, but the dudes, he was going to try to, like, get those dudes, right? Then we have the dynamic of the false accusation of rape. Now, this one's kind of touchy because, for me anyway, because I have had people in my family who have perished due to false allegations of rape. As recently as the 1990s, a person in my family was lynched in the South. I won't say which state, because of a false accusation. And that, when the member of my family who was related to this individual went and tried to go to the law about this, because there's no more Jim Crow and we have equality, right? Went to the local sheriff. The local sheriff told my relative, and I quote, "Everybody here knows what happened. Go home." And so I looked at this through that lens too, right? And I don't talk about this ever. This is the first time I've ever even mentioned this publicly. I don't write about it, talk about it. It's just one of those things that just, it's like one of those things that just happens to people, and you just sort of, it is what it is. And by the way, it hasn't changed my view of, like, race relations or any of that other kind of stuff. Like, I'm able to have a principle and have a position, and I'm able to hold two contradicting thoughts in my head at the same time and be okay. Like, I can do that, right? When we look at that false accusation, and when we look at Mayella, so the dynamic there of her, she has even less power in the structure than even Bob does. And there is some intimation in the story that Bob was beating his daughter and may have even indeed been, assaulting her, sexually or otherwise. And she is even trying to use the system and use the testimony to serve her own ends. As a matter of fact, when she talks to Atticus in the cross-examination, that's one of the more fascinating parts of the story to me, because it's a perfect example of a person who literally is she's underneath Bob. Even she is at the bare bottom of the social structure. She is nothing. She doesn't have a conception. She's so far down. She doesn't have a conception of how far down she is. And yet the thing that she holds on to is her pride. And I think that was Bob's sin. His sin was pride. And I said all that to say that. I think that was the thing that got him. I don't think it was actually he wanted the respect of the town. I think he just had pride. He just had pride.
Pride in what? Pride in what? He was the guilty party of beating his daughter and possibly, to your point, possibly other things, and pushing that guilt off on somebody else. Where's the pride in that? That's not.
I'm saying that pride was the driver. So it's people are weird, Tom. You know this. People are weird. Their motivations are weird, right? And I look at a guy like Bob and I go, okay, he was a proud man. What he had to be proud about didn't matter. It doesn't matter because it doesn't matter how we look at that. It mattered how he looked at that. And again, we're looking at this through Scout's eyes. So we're looking at it through a narrow keyhole. We have to kind of be aware of that, right? And I think that and maybe this may be me putting more weight on this character than this character can actually handle. But when I look at Bob Ewell, I don't see a person who's just pursuing revenge out of a sense of, I want these people to respect me. I see him pursuing it as a sense of, I have hurt pride. My pride has been hurt. My pride has been damaged. And I'm going to go restore that.
I don't know. I'm not sure. I mean, I understand where you're coming from, and I definitely
we can sit on this. It's okay. We can sit on this.
I was saying, I can see where you're coming. I just don't think he was that complicated. I think he was more simple than that. I think it was really that simple that, Atticus made him look bad, and now he's going to hold a vendetta against him. And it's that simple. I don't think he had enough thought. I don't think he had enough brain cells to realize that he had pride. Like that's the way they depict him anyway, right? Like he's
right.
Like that. I'm not sure he had enough self-awareness to be prideful of anything in particular about himself.
Well, okay. All right. Let me ask you this question then. Because we gotta turn a corner here. We talked for a couple hours about Skill of Mockingbird. we spent some time on this. Would you say that Bob had principles? I know. He's a simple man.
A lack of principles, maybe.
He's a simple man with simple appetites. He has principles. Yeah. That food is too rich for Bob. Okay, let's move up the hierarchy. Clearly, Atticus had principles. Clearly,
yeah.
Judge Taylor, very principled, right? Particularly in his courtroom, right? The sheriff, which we've already mentioned, clearly got principles. Jem, right? The brother, not principled yet, but coming along, right? And actually,
you could see them developing.
You could see them developing, right? Okay. Tom Robinson probably could have benefited from having some principles.
Yes, for sure.
Like I think the principle of.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Like the principle of just not going to someone else's house to whom you're not married. Yes. Even if you're walking by on your way home from work. Like just go to work. Just go to work and go home.
Yeah.
Stay on the other side of the street. Stop. Okay.
Yeah. The one that surprised me, I think, was Boo Radley. When you talk about principles,
yeah,
that's the one that stands out that is like, wait a minute. We're taken down a path of belief about this character. And now, throughout the course of the book, you realize that legend is not true. I mean, that I'm not suggesting that it's not an epiphany at the end of the book that he's got some principles. But it is surprising to see that his principles still drive him, even though he's reclusive and he does not interact with anybody. Mm-hmm. He wants no part of the town. He wants no part of talking with anybody. He wants no part of interacting with anybody. But his principles still guide him to do the right thing, even though he's still that reclusive. That's what surprised me. That was the part that was like, did I feel like he was going to get involved in some way? Sure. Like you knew that there was something there because the book kind of drags you along that way. about it's almost like the climax of a movie, right? It like builds up, builds up, builds up, but I wasn't expecting that to be the climax of the movie, so to speak, where Boo Radley really has a keen sense of what's right and wrong and what's principled about and that protective nature that comes across toward the end. So I think that one surprised me more than anybody, whether Bob not having principles or the sheriff having principles or Atticus, of course, having a gigantic moral compass,
Yeah.
but Boo Radley was the one that I was pleasantly surprised about at the end of the book and to be honest, if you think about it from a leadership perspective, Boo Radley is that silent leader, right? Like that guy that doesn't cause a lot of ruckus, or that girl that doesn't draw a lot of attention to herself, but yet everybody seems to follow her or him, right? That's Boo Radley's character to me. Like everybody kind of takes a page out of his book because of something that he is like something he does, but he just kind of does it in a way that nobody really like. He doesn't want people to notice.
So there's a line in the book that Atticus actually tells Scout and Jem when they get guns for Christmas, right? He tells them they can shoot all the Blue Jays that they want.
Yep.
But it's a sin to kill a mockingbird, right?
Right.
Which okay. And I haven't really dug deeply into sort of where that idea comes from. It came from somewhere, and Harper Lee put it in the book.
Well, they do explain it a little bit in the book, right? Because the crows and the blue jays destroy things. They go after farmers, the seeds, like they destroy some of those crops. The mockingbirds don't harm nobody. All they do is provide us beautiful sounds and music.
Right.
Or something to that effect.
To that effect, yeah.
So it's a sin to kill the mockingbird because it's a defenseless creature that has no other purpose than to bring beauty into the world.
Right.
And that's the reference that Scout uses to Boo Radley.
To Boo Radley, right. Except, let me be clear here. Boo Radley knifed a man. Okay.
Yeah.
Come on. With a kitchen knife. And then in the process, because he's sensitive and delicate and doesn't want to have anything to do with the town and all these things that you mentioned, he's kind of allowed to go back into, and this is, by the way, where I agree with the sheriff, even though he didn't frame it this way. Boo Radley was already in prison.
Yeah.
Boo Radley, because of his past experience with his father and the kinds of things that had happened to him before he even showed up, or before any of this these shenanigans ever started, he was already locked in a prison of his own mind. And sometimes, well, again, to paraphrase from the great movie Magnolia, the sheriff in there, the cop in there says, being a cop is hard. Sometimes some people need to be listened to. Sometimes some people need to take a beating. And sometimes some people need to go to jail. And that's a really hard call. And I have to make those kinds of calls every day. And I don't always do it well. And that's the case with Boo Radley, right?
Yes, for sure.
He had to be in his house. That was his jail cell. And it might be a sin to kill a mockingbird, but it's not a sin to lock one up, apparently, and to just let it be a caged bird.
Right.
The moral compass piece, as we round the corner here. Atticus had a gigantic moral compass, and it occurs to me, and that was one of the big things I pulled from this book. It occurs to me that just like when we read about Malcolm X, Malcolm X had a huge moral compass too. He did. Now his moral compass, his moral authority came from religion. That's where his moral compass came from Islam, right? Martin Luther King Jr. had a moral compass. His moral compass came from Christianity. We read Charles Fortis's True Grit. The character in there, the female character in there, her moral compass came from her Christian Pentecostal. Yeah, it might have been Pentecostal. I can't remember right now. I read a lot of books on this podcast. You'll remind me. But it came from that, her came from that Christian basis, right? Her Christian moralism, right? Same thing here, right? Except religion isn't a powerful driver in here. They talk about going to church, but it's not the it's not the orbit around which their lives turn, as sometimes is satirized and exaggerated or caricatured about people in the South.
Right.
One thing I tell folks is that people in the South can be just as unchristian as people in the North. Please give me a break. They're just human beings. The church is full of sinners. I mean, there you go. That's the point of it. And so,
Some of you we're callers. Anyway,
hey, you know what? Come right on down. We've got room for one more. So we have to understand as leaders, I think, and it is something I've really emphasized during the first half of this year on this podcast. We have to understand where our moral compass comes from. I need you to have one. I can't. I think we've had enough of leadership in our world that doesn't have a moral compass. I just think we've had enough, or at least I've had enough. You need to articulate where your moral compass is coming from. And by the way, if your moral compass comes from, and I've said this before on this podcast, if it comes from ESG or DEI or some social thing or whatever culture, fine, say it. Say that that's where your moral compass comes from. Like the CEO of Patagonia. I think that guy's moral compass is not where I would put mine. But that's fine. No one's holding a gun to my head saying I got to go buy a Patagonia sweater. Like, it's fine. Go have your moral compass wherever you want. That's freedom. That's what we have in America. Doesn't impact me. Go do what you want to do with your company. You want to give away your entire company to save a bunch of trees in like Montana? Cool. Knock yourself out, man. You built it. That's your moral compass. And by the way, be very clear with people when they come to work at Patagonia that this is what they're getting. This is why I think that companies like Amazon on the other end of that spectrum, particularly underneath Bezos, not so much under this new guy, but under Bezos was very, very clear. We are here to work. I don't like human beings. They're a real problem. You could all be replaced with robots tomorrow. So work to your highest level of productivity. I will pay you whatever that highest level is, and then you can get the hell out. Why are we objecting to this? Why does this make us feel icky? Well, it makes us feel icky because so many leaders don't clearly articulate where their moral compass comes from, nor do they have the capacity, I think, to defend it. And that's what you see in Atticus. And the other thing that I would take from this is that, as my grandmother might say, the child is the father of the man, right? And so, pay attention to what's happening with your children. In particular, not necessarily the shenanigans they're getting into, but in particular, the example you provide for them as the paterfamilias, as the person who looms large in their conscience. Like, I know that I loom large in my kids' consciences. I know that Tom, you loom large in your children's conscience. You're a big mountain to get over. Like, that's it. And you may not think you're that big, but guess what? Like, you are. In their head, you are. And that's very, very significant. And Atticus was a gigantic mountain that Scout couldn't even begin to understand, and as she's writing the book, looking back on her life, I get a sense that she appreciated that more, obviously, the older and older she got. So how do leaders stay on the leadership path with To Kill a Mockingbird? How do we do that?
Well, I think we already talked about that a little bit. I think part of it is like being open to learning lessons from a multitude of layers and levels, and not sitting on your high horse thinking I'm the CEO, so I know everything. Like, being able to, again, listen to your own words being regurgitated to you, and taking a spoon of your own medicine, so to speak, on occasion. It also shows that portion of the book shows Atticus's humility. Like, he's humble enough to know that when Scout repeats this back to him, she's right. It's not, oh, you learned the lesson I taught you. Oh, it's not, oh, see, you got it. No. It's, you are right. Like he doesn't go into that. Like, and I think that's part of sometimes what we lose as leadership is not allowing somebody else to be right. Just let them be right and learn that lesson back for yourself so that you can become a better leader.
Yeah. Yeah. How do we anchor that kind of leadership to social reform? Because there's all these kinds of things that we would like to see reformed, right? From bias in various places all the way to social inequalities. I mean, we've had an endless outpouring, particularly over the last 10 to 15 years, of just like, this is the endless parade of problems. And yet, we have not had an equally endless outpouring of an endless parade of solutions, much to my frustration, by the way. How do we tie this? You have to know moral leadership, or you have to have a moral compass in order to lead, to fixing some of these problems that we'd like to see fixed. And by the way, we could pick any problem. Like, we don't have to even pick a big one. We could pick like picking up trash in your neighborhood. Like, how do we get leaders to get a community to place their trust in them? Because I'm not worried about changing the environment at a global level. I'm worried about picking up trash on my street.
Yeah, listen. I've always been a huge advocate. I don't know the answer to this question. I'm just gonna be very clear and say, I don't have the answer to this question, other than to say that every leadership role that I have ever had, there's not a single person underneath me that could say that I didn't experience everything they did, because I was right there with them. I was in the, when I was in the restaurant industry, I would wash dishes as a general manager. I ran the restaurant. I would still wash dishes. So the dishwasher could never say that I didn't understand what they were going through. When I was as sales management and sales leadership, I was the one on the ground floor selling the stuff before I ever got there. So the sales rep could never tell me that I didn't understand the plight that they were going through. For me, the only thing that I have in my power is to lead by example, right? Is to be shoulder to shoulder with them, elbow to elbow with them, so that they know that I'm never going to throw something at them that I wouldn't be willing to face myself. Outside of that, I don't have an answer for any of this. Because my answer is always going to be, I'll do it first. If you don't think that that's doable or it's workable, or I'll do it first. And then once I do it, I'll teach you how to do it. And then you'll lead me when I tell you, you'll listen to me when I tell you that this can be done. And here's the numbers that we want to hit and all this stuff. There's going to be buy-in there, because they know that I'm not just blowing smoke up their keisters, right? Like, it's, so for me, and believe me, I am 100% aware and positive that there are better ways. I just don't know of any other than to roll up my sleeves and do it. That's the only leadership material that I have. Like, and you could talk about, like, there's difference, there's conflict resolution and how you can read this book and get better at that. And there's sure, I'm not downplaying any of that. I'm just saying, when it comes to who do I want to follow, I want to follow somebody that I know for a fact has been there, done that, and they're not going to lead me astray just because.
So if you want people to pick up trash in your neighborhood, go pick up trash.
I'm going to go pick up trash.
Go pick up trash. If you want people to treat people better in your workplace, start doing it yourself.
I'm going to start treating people better. Right. Exactly.
If you want income inequality to be overcome, well, give up some of your income.
And by the way, one of my I had this conversation with somebody recently. One of my favorite things about being in sales is that the salary doesn't care what color you are, doesn't care what gender you are. You earn your work, you earn your actual money on your own merits. It's about who you are and how good of a salesperson you are. So that pay inequality, I never had to I'm not suggesting it's not real by any means, or it's not there. I just personally have never had to deal with it in that level, because Now, as people are getting promoted and stuff like that, and we'll say a woman gets promoted to a sales manager, you better damn well know that I was not allowing our company to offer her less money than the sales manager I hired 6 months ago that was a guy. That wasn't going to happen. Because to me, a sales manager gets paid the same that the last sales manager got paid. Why would we offer her less money? Now, if that puts me in a light of being sensitive to that pay inequality, then sure, I'll gladly say thank you. But to me, it wasn't. To me, it was just, I was looking at the job, the role. I didn't care if it was male, female, black, white, Hispanic. None of that mattered. This is the role. This is what it pays, and there you go. And in sales, that's a lot easier to do. So I will say that's a lot easier to do because in other facets of business, the KPIs are so different. What you judge people on is different. It becomes very gray, and I don't like gray, which is why I love sales. It's very clear. You're a great salesperson. You're gonna get paid because you're great. It's that simple. If you suck, you're fired. It's really that simple. I've never fired a minority person and had them look at me and go, that was because I'm a girl. That was a woman. Sorry. That was because I'm a woman, or that was because I'm black, or I've never had that happen. Every time I've ever fired somebody, it's been like, look, you suck. That's it. The numbers say that you're not very good. Now, there have been rare occasions where somebody said, well, I didn't get the training I expected. Okay, let's back the truck up for a second. Let's talk about your training. Did you get this? Did you get that? Did you get this? Yes, yeah, whatever. Okay, well, then you got the same training everybody else did. So you're fired.
So you're fired. So you got to go.
But
you got to go.
If the answer is no, again, because certain roles I play, I'm hiring different levels, right? So certain roles I go, what did you got the same training? Well, I got this one, but didn't get the next two. All right, let's talk about a improvement plan, right? Yeah. Let's talk about a production improvement plan, a PIP, whatever. So then maybe they don't get fired that day, but they're going to have very clear expectations that they're going to get that training, and you have now 60 days to turn this around, or you're fired.
Yep.
But again, that has nothing to do with race, color, sex, none of that. It's just clear. It's very clear. So anyway, but to your original question, yes, if the trash needs to be going to pick up, I'm going to at least get it started. I might ask for help. I'd be the Tom Sawyer of that, right? Like, look how much fun I'm having picking up this trash. Anybody want to join me? Go on, join me. And then I might back away into the trash.
he's gonna sell it. He's gonna sell it. He's gonna sell it. Well, with that, I'd like to thank everybody for listening today to the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast. Oof, almost flubbed out at the end. And with that, we're out. Thank you for listening to the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast today. And now that you've made it this far, you should subscribe to the audio version of this show on all the major podcast players, including Apple iTunes, Spotify, YouTube Music, and everywhere else where podcasts are available. There's also a video version of our podcast on our YouTube channel. Like and subscribe to the video version of this podcast on the Leadership Toolbox channel on YouTube. Just search for Leadership Toolbox and hit the subscribe button there on YouTube. And while you're doing that, leave a 5-star review if you like what we're doing here on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. Just go below the player and hit 5 stars. We need those reviews to grow, and it's the easiest way to help grow this show. And tell all your friends, of course, in leadership. By the way, if you don't like what we're doing here, well, you can always listen to another leadership show. There are several other good ones out there. At least that's what I've heard. All right. Well, that's it for me.